तो धम्मट वग्ग में हम आज पद संख्या 270 पढ़ेंगे। इसका नाम है द स्टोरी ऑफ ए फिशरमैन नेम्ड अरिय। एक मछुआरा है जिसका नाम अरिय है, उसके बारे में ये आज का हमारा पहले कंटेक्स्ट है। उसके ऊपर वर्स बोलेंगे भगवान बुद्ध। तो ये जो वर्स हम पढ़ेंगे ये चेतवन मोनास्ट्री में भगवान बुद्ध ने बोला था। और इस एक मछुआरा था जिसका नाम था अरिय। और वो वंस देयर वाज अ फिशरमैन हु लिव्ड नियर द नॉर्थ गेट ऑफ सावर्थी। तो यहाँ से ये गाथा शुरू होती है कि एक मछुआरा था जो कि सावर्थी के उत्तर दिशा में उत्तरी दरवाजे पर रहता था। और एक बार भगवान बुद्ध ने अपनी जो अलौकिक शक्तियां हैं उनसे देखा कि इस मछुआरे के लिए अभी उचित समय है जब ये सोतापत्ती फल को प्राप्त कर सकता है। तो ऐसा जानने पर उन्होंने, जब वो अपने भिक्षा प्राप्त करके वह जब लौट रहे थे, तो अपने भिक्षुओं के साथ उसी जगह पर रुक गए जहाँ पर अरिय मछली पकड़ रहा था। जब उस मछुआरे ने भगवान बुद्ध को देखा तो उसने अपना मछली पकड़ने का जो भी इंस्ट्रूमेंट थे, जाल थे, वो सब एक तरफ फेंका और उनके पास आकर खड़ा हो गया। भगवान बुद्ध ने उस समय अपने जो जितने भी भिक्षु थे उन सब से नाम पूछना शुरू किया उस मछुआरे की उपस्थिति में। और जब सारे भिक्षुओं ने अपना नाम बताया तो अंत में भगवान ने उस फिशरमैन का, उस मछुआरे का नाम भी पूछा। और जब उस मछुआरे ने अपना नाम अरिय बताया तो भगवान बुद्ध ने बोला कि जो नोबल वंश है, क्योंकि अरिय का एक तात्पर्य आर्य भी होता है, नोबल वंश। तो भगवान बुद्ध ने बोला जो अरिय है वो तो किसी भी प्राणी की हिंसा नहीं करते, उनको नुकसान नहीं पहुंचाते। जबकि जो मछुआरा था वो तो मछलियों की प्राण को ले रहा था, तो इसलिए वो तो इस नाम के लिए योग्य ही नहीं है, उसका नाम के अनुरूप कार्य नहीं कर रहा है। और ऐसा बोलकर भगवान बुद्ध ने ये पद संख्या बोली। न तेन अर्यो होति येन पाणानि हिंसति अहिंसा सब पाणानन अर्योति पवुच्यति। He is not a noble one who injures living beings. He is called a noble one because he is harmless towards all living beings. तो जो दूसरे प्राणियों को कष्ट देता है, नुकसान पहुंचाता है, वो एक आर्य नहीं होता। जबकि जो सारे प्राणियों के प्रति अहिंसा की भावना रखता है उसी को आर्य कहा जाता है। So, Vishalji, would you like to explain this, or would you like me to continue with the translation first?
I'll just give a quick introduction, and then if you wouldn't
Yeah.
mind just going through it. So I thought that we could use this very important verse to just go over what is considered sama ajiva, or right livelihood, in the Buddha's teaching. And then I thought we could also talk about the role of sila in general. So Nikhilji, if you wouldn't mind going over this one.
Okay, so Sama Ajiva, right livelihood, and this is Mahachattarisak Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 117. इसमें भगवान बुद्ध इस सूत्र में बोलते हैं, एंड व्हाट बिकॉज इज रॉन्ग लाइवलीहुड। तो जो सम्यक आजीविका नहीं है, मिथ्या आजीविका है, उसके बारे में चर्चा हो रही है कि मिथ्या आजीविका, गलत तरीके से अपने जीविका को कमाना, वो क्या है? स्कीमिंग, टॉकिंग, हिंटिंग, बिलिटलिंग, परसुइंग गेन विद गेन, दिस इज रॉन्ग लाइवलीहुड। ट्रांसलेशन करता हूँ। तो स्कीमिंग, टॉकिंग, हिंटिंग, belittling and pursuing gain with gain, this is wrong livelihood. What I understand मैं बता देता हूँ, बाकी फिर आप सर हैं और विशाल जी करेक्ट करेंगे। इस तरह की कुछ व्हाट इज रॉन्ग लाइवलीहुड में स्कीमिंग मतलब तिकड़म लगाना किसी प्रकार का, किसी बाई हुक और बाई क्रुक, या बात करना या किसी को नीचा दिखाना। आई एम नॉट श्योर हिंटिंग और हिटिंग है ये, आई मीन, और परसुइंग गेन विद गेन, लाभ से लाभ कमाते जाना, इसको गलत आजीविका बताया गया है। एंड जो सम्मा आजीवो है, व्हाट इज द राइट लाइवलीहुड, सेकंड पॉइंट है। तो राइट लाइवलीहुड दो प्रकार की है, भगवान बुद्ध कहते हैं। देयर इज राइट लाइवलीहुड अफेक्टेड बाय टेंट्स पार्टेकिंग ऑफ मेरिट राइपनिंग इन एक्विजिशंस, एंड देयर इज राइट लाइवलीहुड दैट इज नोबल टेंटलेस सुप्रामेंडेंट अ फैक्टर ऑफ पाथ। तो ये सम्यक आजीविका भी दो तरीके से बताई है। एक तो वो है जिसमें अभी आसव से जो अभी भी प्रभावित है, और हमारे पुण्यों को लेती है, और ripening in acquisitions. I'm not sure how to translate it. And then there is right livelihood that is noble, taintless, supramundane. और एक दूसरे प्रकार की लाइवलीहुड है जो कि बहुत आर्य है, और बिना किसी आसव के है, और अलौकिक है, और एक हमारा जो मार्ग है अष्टांगिक मार्ग, उसका एक फैक्टर भी है जिसको हम सम्मा आजीविका कहते हैं। ऑलराइट, सम्मा आजीविका में जो हम पढ़ते हैं अष्टांगिक मार्ग में, वो सेकंड वाली है, और पहले वाली है जो अभी भी आसवों से युक्त है, इस प्रकार से बोला गया है। ओके, सो बट राइट लाइवलीहुड इज सम्मा आजीविका इज सेकंड पॉइंट। And what bhikkhu is right livelihood that is affected by taints partaking of merit and ripening in the acquisition. Here bhikkhu, a noble disciple, abundance wrong livelihood and gains his living by right livelihood. This is right livelihood that is affected by the taints ripening in the acquisition. और ये जो अभी पहली प्रकार की है, जो पुथुजन के लिए हम बोलेंगे, जिनकी जो कि अभी भी आसवों से इफेक्ट हो रही है, वो वो क्या है। तो उसमें बोलते हैं कि हेयर बिकॉज अ नोबल डिसाइपल अबंडेंस रॉन्ग लाइवलीहुड एंड गेन्स इज लिविंग बाय राइट लाइवलीहुड। इसमें वो गलत तरीके से पैसा कमाना बंद कर देते हैं और सही तरीके से पैसे को कमाते हैं, ऑल्दो वो अभी भी आसवों से युक्त है। और सॉरी, मैंने पुथुजन बोला, पुथुजन नहीं है इसमें, नोबल डिसाइपल आर्यों के लिए ही है पहली वाली भी। एंड दूसरा है इन व्हाट बिकॉज राइट लाइवलीहुड दैट इज नोबल, जो अभी टू फोल्ड में सेकेंड टाइप की है, जो कि आर्य है, आसवों से रहित है, अलौकिक है, और अष्टांगिक मार्ग का एक पार्ट है। उसके बारे में है कि वो गलत तरीके से पैसे कमाने से बचना, और द abstaining, refraining, abstinence from it in one whose mind is noble, whose mind is taintless, who possesses the noble path and is developing the noble path. This is the right livelihood that is noble, a factor of path. तो गलत तरीके से पैसे कमाने से बचना, फिर जो शीलों का पालन है उनको करना, फ्रॉम इट इन वन हुज माइंड इज नोबल, फ्रॉम इट, जिनके भी मन शुद्ध है और जिनके मन आसव से रहित है, और इस तरह से अपने अष्टांगिक मार्ग को भावित करना। ये एक तरह से जो टू फोल्ड में दूसरा समाजी वो है। एंड फिर लास्ट में लिखा है राइट लाइवलीहुड डज नॉट ट्रेड इन वेपन, लिविंग बीइंग, मीट, अल्कोहलिक ड्रिंक एंड पॉइजन। ये अंगुत्तर निकाय से रिफर किया है, थोड़ा स्पेसिफिक बताया है कि सम्मा आजीव का मतलब है शस्त्रों में व्यापार ना करना, और जीव जीव आई मीन जो मनुष्यों का या प्राणियों का, बाकी प्राणियों का भी व्यापार ना करना, जीवित और मांस का व्यापार ना करना, और जो मद्य है, जो मादक पदार्थ है, उनका व्यापार ना करना, और विष का, जहर का व्यापार ना करना। ये समाज को में आ जाएंगे फिर। सो Vishalji, would you mind to explain a little bit of this, like
Sure.
ripening in the acquisitions, and what is that?
Yes, thank you for that. So in the first Majjhima Nikaya 117, it's a little less clear if this is referring only to bhikkhus or to both bhikkhus and non-ordained individuals, but those who are practicing on the path. But the two distinctions between right livelihood, as I understood it, is in the first one, it is still an individual who is within the realm of merit and demerit. So they have the right intention. They are not practicing wrong livelihood, but they still haven't they haven't reached a supramundane state in their path. So therefore, they are still subject to the accumulation of merit and the ripening that comes from punya. So they're still within the realm of merit and demerit. They haven't yet gone free of both wholesome and unwholesome. In the second distinction of right livelihood, it is an individual who is in the supramundane. So this is somebody who has seen the Dhamma, is essentially most likely an arahant, because in this case, he doesn't mention anything about merit or the ripening of merit, and it's essentially somebody whose mind is taintless. So this is somebody who's finished the path. But I thought it would be good even for us as lay people to look at how even within the Bhikkhu Sangha, the Buddha talks about, like when he talks about wrong livelihood in the top, he's talking about the ways that even a monastic can manipulate other people, like hinting to ask for donations, or how people can talk to each other in a way that's negative. But there's obviously, you can even read it from the perspective of a layperson who is serious about the path. So I thought it would be helpful for us to see that the Buddha makes this distinction. As always, with all factors of the path, he talks about the mundane factors of the path, the Eightfold Noble Path, and then the supramundane factors of the path. And those are the same Eightfold Noble Path, but once the mind has attained to a certain level of purification, and they are what's called a sekha or higher, which is somebody who's at least at the level of a sotapanna, then they are essentially practicing the supramundane factors of the path. And then the second reference I thought was very pertinent to us in our work, because the Buddha gives, and actually there's another sutta, I think in the Samyutta Nikaya, or maybe Professor Darji remembers, where he goes into more detail about right livelihood, and he includes many more professions in it. But the one that I think is sort of the stock for this is the one which is quoted here, essentially dealing with non-harming. So, dealing in weapons that are going to cause injury or death, dealing with curtailing the freedom of beings, either animals or other human beings, and then killing, so meat, and then alcoholic beverages, which obviously is going to affect somebody's sense of right and wrong, and poison again is trying to cause harm. So if you look at it, it's all associated with non-harming of other individuals, other beings, and also non-harming of ourselves. So I thought, this would be a nice summary for what would be quite pertinent to our daily life. And then I thought we would go a little bit more in detail on the next page on what is the karma. So if you can go to the next page here, Nikhilji.
Yeah. And what is pursuing gain with gain? It is like exchanging. Okay, you give me this, I'll give you that. Is that?
Yeah, it's basically greed. It's it's essentially just greed, as I understand it, where you're trying to get more and more, and when you get more, you use that more to get more. It's sort of this never-ending thirst for more and more. That's how I understand it.
Okay. तो एक बार सारांश में बता देता हूँ। दो प्रकार की आजीविका है, जिसमें एक जो पहली आजीविका है वो भी सज्जन लोग ही करते हैं, लेकिन अभी वो पुण्य और पाप के आयाम में रहते हैं, और इसलिए उनकी आजीविका को एक प्रकार का कहा जाता है, जिसमें अभी वो पक रहे होते हैं धर्म में। और वही आजीविका दूसरी प्रकार की बन जाती है जब वो एक सर्टेन लेवल पे पहुंच जाते हैं, जिसके लिए लिखा गया है कि अब वो नॉट अफेक्टेड बाई आसवा, अब वो आसवाओं से अफेक्टेड नहीं है, तो वो एक स्तर तक पहुंच जाते हैं। उसके बाद फिर वो सम्यक आजीविका को कमाते हैं। ऐसा मुझे समझ में आया, बाकी डिस्कशन के लिए हम बाद में ओपन रहेंगे। देन द कर्मा ऑफ पाप एंड पुण्य, पाप और पुण्य के कर्म।
Yeah, so I thought that we could then talk a little bit more about so what exactly does sila do to the mind, and why is it such an important component on which everything else is built? So essentially, what is sila? Sila is the wholesome karma of body, speech, and mind. And so what is that? So why is it important? Because we know karma is intention in the mind. So karma is the habit of a mind. It's the propensity of a mind to be a certain way. That's karma. And as we know from our study and our own experience, whatever action we do once, we are more likely to do it again. And I think that the group had maybe in the rain season retreat had done the Abhidhamma study, and we know even from that when the mind clings to something, it's more likely for it to cling to it again. And so what happens when somebody kills once? They're more likely to kill again and again. Likewise, if somebody steals once, they're more likely to do that over and over again. And that is the karma of that action, because it will cause that unwholesome action or that unwholesome mental state that generates that physical action to come into the mind again and again. So anger is a good example. We know anger begets more anger. And then the side effect of this, other than the unwholesomeness of the act that is unwholesome, like killing or anger, is that it will prevent the arising of wholesome mental states. So not only does unwholesomeness bring more unwholesomeness, but it prevents wholesomeness from arising. So that is the karma of yoniso manasikara, which is that if you dwell on something without wisdom, without sati sampajanya, then that becomes the habit of the mind. So it doesn't just involve the 5 precepts, but it could also involve things like sadness or worry or doubt or anything that we allow our minds to just think, quote unquote, carelessly. And so that's why the Buddha and the Ajahns lay a lot of stress on yoniso manasikara, and that you guard your mind. And we talked about it last time as well, that a lot of the teachers will say, don't just let your mind think aimlessly, always guard what the mind is doing. And it's for this reason that it creates karma. Anything our mind clings to and becomes bhava, it will cause it to happen more frequently. So I'll stop there before we go to the next paragraph.
So should I go to the next slide first, or?
Oh, no, I thought you could do. Would you like to translate that? Or maybe we could do that way.
ओके, तो इसमें ये कह रहे हैं कि हम कोई भी कर्म करते हैं मानसिक, वाचिक या बॉडी से, तो उसमें चांसेस ये होते हैं कि हम उस कर्म को अगर एक बार करेंगे तो बार बार करने की हमारी प्रवृत्ति बन सकती है। वो एक तरह से हम एक फीडबैक लूप में फंस जाते हैं। तो अगर किसी की एक बार हत्या कर दी तो काफी चांस है कि हम आगे भी हत्या करते रहेंगे। और इसका नुकसान ये है कि कर्म जो अनहोलसम कर्मा है, उनका नुकसान ये होता है कि एक तो वो हमें उस प्रकार की प्रवृत्ति में डाल देते हैं, और साथ ही जो होलसम कर्म है उनको उभरने से भी वो आगे रोकते हैं। तो इसलिए हमें हमेशा काम योनिसो मनसिकारा के साथ करना चाहिए, अच्छे से सोच समझ के करना चाहिए। और अगर हम उल्टा करते हैं, यानी कि अयोनिसो मनसिकारा करते हैं, अप्रमादित रहते हैं, तो बिना सोचे समझे करते हैं, तो फिर हम अनहोलसम कर्मा के ट्रैप में फंस जाएंगे। और यही भगवान बुद्ध ने भी बताया है कि हमें ऐसे मनोकर्म करने हैं, हमारी मानसिक अवस्था ऐसी होनी चाहिए जो कि होलसम हो, पुण्यदायक हो। और क्योंकि वंस अगेन इसमें भी वही प्रवृत्ति है कि अगर होलसम कर्म करेंगे तो वो आगे के लिए भी हमें इंस्पायर करेगा होलसम कर्म करने के लिए। और फिर आगे इसमें लिखा है कि अ माइंड इम्ब्यूड विद पुण्य इज अ माइंड दैट कैन अटेन टू समाधि। और अगर हम होलसम स्टेट में रहेंगे, हमारे मन में पुण्य करेंगे, पुण्यानुसति हमारे पास रहेगी, तो हम आसानी से समाधि की तरफ जाएंगे। और जब हमारी समाधि पुष्ट होगी तो फिर हम बेहतर धम्म विचय कर पाएंगे, और जो मुक्तिदायक एक सम्मादिट्ठी है उसकी तरफ हम बढ़ पाएंगे। और यही कारण है कि जो शीलों का पालन है, जिनके माध्यम से हम सम्यक कर्म करते हैं, वो आधारशिला मानी जाती है हमारे 3-fold जो प्रैक्टिस है शील समाधि प्रज्ञा की।
Thank you, Nikhilji. We can go to the next one then.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought we could sort of think a little bit more about what happens to a mind that is following precepts. So a mind without precepts is a mind that can go anywhere, think anything, do anything. And that might suggest a degree of freedom because, the mind has no restraints. But what does that do to the mind? The mind is then, uh, every time that we do something, the mind is becoming. It's called the bhava. When we look at the dependent origination, it's the process of becoming. Anything that the mind takes up, it's becoming, gets colored with that experience. There is Vedana that arises from that experience. And so that's the reason that this process without precepts can be so bewildering for the mind, because the mind is constantly looking for the next thing. So the way the Buddha's, in the Buddha's teachings, he gives this sort of gradually constricting precepts. So you start with the 5 precepts where you strip away the mind's ability to become the most unwholesome karma, the kind of karma that's the most negative. And so you prevent the mind from being able to delight in that. So not to say that any of us here would want to kill anybody, but in general, the mind without restraints can tend to get stuck in those really bad 5 unwholesome states. So if we think of it purely from dependent origination, the Buddha's teachings are very beautifully described in a way to gradually constrain the mind's ability to become from a very unwholesome states to gradually more and more refined states of becoming. So if we look at the 8 precepts, that once the mind has let go the habit of trying to cling to the 5 unwholesome states that the 5 precepts are associated with, then the precepts are more about not spending time with entertainment, not eating more than once a day, not sleeping on a high bed. All of these are further refinements of which prevent the mind from indulging in pleasure in sort of these easy ways of getting lost. And so that allows more and more time for the mind to have to deal with what is called the neutral mental feelings. So we have pleasant and unpleasant mental feelings, which are very obvious to us, but most of life is lived in what is the intermediate, the neutral mental feelings. And if we examine how our minds work, we are constantly trying to run away from those neutral mental feelings because we consider them as either boredom or not fulfilling. We're constantly trying to fill that emptiness in the mind, which is the neutral sense or neutral feeling, with a pleasurable feeling, and sometimes even an unpleasant feeling. And this is very nicely described in the Chula Vedala Sutta, where it says that neutral mental feelings associated with ignorance are unpleasant, whereas neutral mental feelings associated with wisdom are pleasant. So once again, it's telling us what we already know from our own experience, that we are constantly trying to run away from that neutrality in the mind because we misconstrue or misperceive it as unpleasant. And so finally, with the 227 precepts of the monastic, then the Buddha has really honed in and restrained the mind's ability to indulge in bhava of different kinds. And then it creates the space for the Eightfold Noble Path to develop and to be able to potentially see into the Dhamma and let go of all things. But this is how I see the role of precepts, and they are more than just moral imperatives, although initially that's what they are. They then become a very, very important part of creating space in the mind to be able to develop in the path. And I'll stop there.
ओके, थैंक यू। तो इसमें फर्दर इस स्लाइड्स में जो हमारे को शील का पालन है उसको क्रमशः कैसे हम देखें उसके बारे में बताया गया है कि जो शील है वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले करते हैं हमारे चित्त को शुद्ध करने में। और अगर हम, एक तो है नो प्रीसेप्ट्स, एक लिखा हुआ है, अगर हमारे पास कोई भी शील नहीं है, हमारे पास कोई भी संयम नहीं है, तो हमारा मन कहीं पर भी भागेगा, किसी भी स्थिति में चला जाएगा और फिर उसके साथ उसके अंदर भव आ जाएगा, वो कैसे भी एक्सपीरियंस में रंग जाएगा। और जब हम उसको संयमित कर लेते हैं, उसको कम से कम 5 प्रिसेप्ट्स में लेकर आते हैं, भगवान बुद्ध ने धीरे धीरे जो उसका डोमेन है उसको छोटा करते जा रहे हैं। पहले उन्होंने 5 प्रिसेप्ट्स बोले कि कम से कम इनसे तो हर हाल में बचना ही है, क्योंकि ये सबसे ज्यादा अनहोलसम कर्मा होते हैं। और जैसे कि प्राणातिपाता, प्राणियों की हत्या करना, चोरी करना वगैरह, तो इनको हमें बिल्कुल बचना है। और उसके बाद जब हम उसी प्रिसेप्ट्स में और आगे उतरना चाहें तो फिर 8 हो जाते हैं वो, जिसमें 3 एक्स्ट्रा जुड़ रहे हैं, जो कि है ऊंचे शयन ना करना, ऊंचे बिस्तरों पर ना सोना, और दिन में एक बार भोजन करना, और नृत्य और इन सब में ज्यादा मन ना लगाना, मनोरंजन में, अनावश्यक मनोरंजन में मन ना लगाना। तो ऐसे करके फिर हमारा मन और थोड़ा सा संतुलित हो जाता है। और फिर उसके बाद इसमें चुल्ल वेदाल सूत्र का विशाल जी ने बताया था, सो द माइंड इज डिनाइड इवन मोर अपॉर्चुनिटीज टू फाइंड डिलाइट इन मोर एक्टिविटीज एंड द प्रिसेप्ट ऑफ मोनास्टिक अलाउ द माइंड। अब जब भी मोनास्टिक में जाते हैं तो 227 विनय के आ जाते हैं रूल। तो अभी उनका मन को बहुत ही थोड़ी जगह मिलती है जब वो यहाँ वहाँ भटक सकता है या भव चक्र में पड़ सकता है। तो उनके पास बहुत ही रेस्ट्रेंट होता है, जिससे कि वो अपने ऊपर खुद के चित्त को शुद्ध करने के ऊपर काम कर पाते हैं। और with this graduated restraint, the mind has space to develop the wholesome karma of the eightfold noble path, and upon seeing into Dhamma, it may finally let go of all bhava. और जब चित्त थोड़ा शांत हो जाता है और वो धम्म को देख लेता है, तो फिर वो जो पतित समुपपाद में हम चक्र में फंसे होते हैं, उससे बाहर निकल सकते हैं। एंड विशाल जी ने एक चीज बोली कि अगर आपने चूल्हे में दाल सूत्र में बोला कि अगर अगर हमारे पास कम है और उसमें इग्नोरेंस है तो वो दुख है, और अगर कम है और उसमें विजडम है तो वो सुख है, ऐसा बोला।
I'm not quite sure if that's. I don't completely understand
Can you
what you're saying.
repeat that? Can
Yeah.
you repeat?
So I was just saying that if we examine, once we've kept the 5 precepts for long enough and we're able to see the rising and ceasing of phenomena in our minds with our practice, then we realize that, and we've been doing Sati Sampajanyan for a long time, we realize that most of the time our mind is trying to go towards some experience where it can feel pleasure, run away from the indifference, right? So the neutral mental feeling for a patujana is unpleasant. The mind with ignorance is unable to live with neutral mental feelings. And so in the Chula Vedala Sutta, it's said that neutral mental feelings associated with ignorance is unpleasant, whereas neutral mental feelings with wisdom are pleasant. And the Buddha describes also, if I remember the exact, equanimity is the greatest happiness, right? So it's basically a lack of pleasant mental feelings or unpleasant mental feelings. Just equanimity is the most is the happiest, is the most peaceful state. So I think that sort of becomes important in the context of what we're talking about, and why this gradual constriction of the mind's ability to roam can be very difficult, but can also be very productive if we use it.
ओके ओके, तो विशाल जी ने बेसिकली जो असुखद अदुखद वेदना है, जो कि नॉर्मली पीपल पकड़ ही नहीं पाते, वो या तो राग में रहते हैं या द्वेष में रहते हैं, सुखद वेदना में रहते हैं या दुखद वेदना में रहते हैं। तो इसमें इनका कहना है कि अगर हम थोड़ा सा और संयमित होंगे, प्रिसेप्ट्स में अपने मन को स्थिर करेंगे, तो हम उस असुखद अदुखद वेदना को भी महसूस करने लगेंगे। और उस असुखद अदुखद वेदना में अगर हम इग्नोरेंट रहेंगे तो फिर वो हमें दुख देगी, और वही असुखद अदुखद वेदना जिसको हम नॉर्मली बोर्डम समझते हैं और उससे भागते हैं, उसको समझने लगेंगे, उसमें पहिया को मिला देंगे, तो फिर वही इक्वानिमिटी बन जाएगी। और जो इक्वानिमिटी है, समता भाव, उपेक्षा भाव है, उसको भगवान बुद्ध ने एक बहुत बड़ा सुख बोला है, हाईएस्ट हैप्पीनेस बोला है। ओह वंडरफुल, थैंक यू थैंक यू। सो आई विल गो टू द नेक्स्ट स्लाइड।
Yes, thank you.
या
Okay, so then I thought it might be important for us to understand how could it be that this fisherman, whose name was Arya, given his profession of killing, could be ready for Sotapatti. And I think that maybe that question was an oversimplification, but I thought it would give us the opportunity to discuss the importance that has been mentioned in a few suttas, and I couldn't readily remember which one but perhaps Professor Dharji would know, where it's not just the intention of the action that's important, but also whether there is delight associated with it. So Nandi Raga. And the suttas talk about the kama of killing that is associated with Nandi Raga is much stronger than the kama of just killing. So one can think of that, even in our lay understanding of somebody doing something that's wrong, but delighting in it or enjoying it is obviously, even from the perspective of how we think of morality, seems to be worse than if they were to just do it because they had to. So for delight to rise, there's a greater investment in creating a sense of self. And so the karmic consequences are also much deeper. So likewise, I said, for all unwholesome mental states or papa, the mind that relishes and enjoys the breaking of the precepts, the manokamma, is much deeper. And then, in talking about Arya, we all know the story of Angulimala, who was actually killing people, not fish, and still had enough wholesome mental qualities to attain arahantship. And so, we know the commentaries tell us that he wasn't killing out of delight, but rather out of a sense of obedience to his teacher, his ex-teacher. And that is also pertinent to wholesome karma. The Kubajans say, and quite frequently in Thailand, that those who have delighted in the Dhamma in prior lives find the Dhamma again in this lifetime. So I think that's a very encouraging observation, and for everybody in this group who've often expressed some degree of sadness that they didn't find the Dhamma sooner in life, I think this should reassure us that this isn't something that we've done for the first time, but have probably done in many lives before. So I'll stop there for this translation, Nikhilji.
Yeah. So ये जो स्लाइड है वो एक प्रश्न से शुरू हो रही है कि जो अरिय है, जिसका मछुआरा प्रोफेशन था, वो सोतापत्ती के लिए कैसे तैयार हो गया। तो इस प्रश्न के एक्सप्लेन करते हुए, उत्तर को एक्सप्लेन करते हुए जो लिखा गया है वो ये है कि भगवान बुद्ध ने जो एम्फेसिस किया है, जो भगवान बुद्ध ने जोर दिया है, वो चेतना पर जोर दिया है कि हमारे के कर्म करते समय हमारी चेतना कैसी है। कहीं हम अगर हम अनहोलसम कर्म कर रहे हैं तो अगर उसमें हम नंदी राग यानी कि उसमें हम आनंद ले रहे हैं तो फिर चेतना ज्यादा खराब है और वो अनहोलसम कर्म ज्यादा बड़ा हो जाएगा। तो जो भगवान बुद्ध के सूत्र हैं इसमें लिखा है कि हमारी जैसे किसी प्राणी को मार रहे हैं उस समय अगर हम उसमें आनंदित हो रहे हैं तो वो कर्म ज्यादा भयंकर होंगे, बजाय इसके कि हमारे को मारना है किसी मजबूरी बस। और अगर उसमें हम आनंद ले रहे हैं तो फिर हम कहीं ना कहीं अत्ता भाव भी उसमें आ रहा है। और इस प्रकार से अगर हम ऐसे ही प्रिसेप्ट्स में भी अगर हम ब्रेक कर रहे हैं जानबूझकर और उसमें उसमें नंदी राग जगा रहे हैं तो फिर जो मनोकाम बनेंगे वो कहीं गहरे बन जाएंगे। और इसलिए आर्य के साथ उतना बुरा नहीं था क्योंकि वो उसका प्रोफेशन था मछली मारना, उसके अंदर नंदी राग उसको नहीं था। और उसके अलावा दूसरा एग्जाम्पल फिर हम अंगुलीमाल का ले सकते हैं। वो तो आर्य तो मछली मारता था, ये तो मनुष्यों को मारता था अंगुलीमाल। और उसके बावजूद उसके पास इतनी पर्याप्त मात्रा में होलसम मानसिक अवस्थाएं थी कि वो अरहंतशिप तक पहुंच गया भगवान बुद्ध के संरक्षण में, निर्देशन में। तो इसमें वही है कि जो कमेंट्रीज अवेलेबल है वो हमें यही बताती है कि जो अंगुलीमाल था वो लोगों को आनंदित होकर नहीं मार रहा था, उसको कोई आनंद नहीं मिल रहा था, बल्कि उसके साथ था कि वो थोड़ा मार्ग भटक गया था अपने जो उसके एक टीचर थे उनकी आज्ञा मानने के उसमें वो मार्ग से भटका हुआ था। उन्होंने कुछ ऐसी आज्ञा दी थी और वो उसकी वजह से ये करता था। तो ये तो निगेटिव कर्मा के लिए हुआ, लेकिन हम वैसा वर्षा होलसम कर्मा के लिए भी इस चीज को अप्लाई कर सकते हैं कि अगर हम अच्छे कर्म करेंगे तो फिर वो हमारे लिए अच्छे मनोकर्म उपजाएंगे आगे के लिए भी, और हम आगे के लाइफ टाइम में भी धम्मा में जुड़े रहेंगे, जैसे कि अब बहुत सारे पूर्वाचार्य से बोलते हैं। और कभी भी धर्म से जुड़ जाओ उसके बाद फिर वो आगे फलित होते हैं, आगे भी उस तरह की होलसम स्टेट्स को आगे कंटिन्यू करते हैं। So,
Thank you, Nikhil.
this was the slide. So now, if anybody has any question and something, they may ask. I personally like your this touching Asukad Adukad Vedna neutral feeling, because that is a topic very we don't touch very frequently. So thank you, Vishalji. That is food for pondering now.
Sure.
किसी और को कुछ बोला है, या मेरी ट्रांसलेशन में अगर कुछ चेंजेस करने हैं आप लोगों को, सर को, तो आप लोग कृपया बता दें.
मैं थोड़ा सा कुछ कहना चाहूँगा. I first of all like to compliment Vishal ji for an excellent summing up of Samajivika and all the related issues with that. Very well presented and summary from various sutras really enhance our understanding of these things very much. One or two small things जो I need some clarification on is, one is the same point that Nikhil asked, that is gain with gain कुछ लिखा था ना आपने. So उसका कुछ कई सारे meaning हो सकते हैं. One, of course, you explain that one who is aimlessly just greedy and wants more and more. I thought it could also, if you take it directly, I don't know what the sutra exactly says, but it could also mean, for example, earning interest on whatever gains you have made in the past. Is that gain on gain? And is that a wrong ajivika? Just a stupid thought perhaps, but since it came to my mind, I thought I'll just ask it. The second question was relating can you go to the precept slide? Yeah. Basically, precepts is all about, restraining your mind in some sense, in a very broad sense, if I was to say it. So, which is, of course, one of the, very important tools of our practice, very important tools. But sometimes I often think about this thing. Sometimes restraining the mind can also be a problem. For example, I'm giving a very, perhaps not a very relevant example. Take the mind of a scientist or a real thinker who lets her mind wander in all kinds of directions. And of course, somewhat guided, but sometimes aimless also. And that's how some breakthroughs come. So probably it has a place somewhere. So does that fit into this idea, or is it compatible with the idea of precepts, or it's totally meaningless what I'm saying? These are the two things.
I think that it's totally relevant. And the way I would answer that is in two different ways. The first I would say is the goal is different. So if the goal is to attain bhava nirodha, then that's different from a goal of trying to attain a breakthrough in quantum physics. And the two don't have to be mutually exclusive, certainly, but often are. So I think that it depends on whether we are trying to develop our intellect and our analytical skills, or are we trying to see the Dhamma. So that's one way that I would answer that. The other way I may answer that is that, and this is something that a lot of people who've done this practice would probably attest to quite a bit, that when one follows the path, even if it's associated with restraint like this, the times when the mind needs to be used for intellectual activity, the acumen and the precision with which the mind works becomes heightened many fold. So I think that even from the perspective of intellectual inquiry, a mind that's been calmed and sort of made balanced by this involvement with the Eightfold Noble Path is more productive. So I think that may be how I would say it. Now, the other thing that I would say, that the restraint is not an end in itself. What we do with that restraint is very important, because after all, as you said correctly, Surendra Prasad ji, just restraining the mind can sometimes lead to anxiety and restlessness. But we have to have the other factors of the path. This is just sila. If we don't have a samadhi and a sati sampajanya and panya at a level that's balanced, then we will not be successful. So what we do with the space created inside is really going to be what really makes a difference. So that's how I would answer those.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you very much, Vishnu.
Sure.
For gains from gains, I have one example strikes me, that is a share market. People indulge
I was
in
wondering about that.
Share market is a glaring example of gains from gain. And what you mentioned was interest on your earnings. Suppose you are putting your money in the bank, you are not making any conscious efforts, you are just getting it. So I think that will not be strictly gains from gain, it is automatically coming to you.
So I was wondering what is actually mentioned in the sutta on this, and that would clarify.
I think the example which strikes me is share trading. Interest is all, I think, will not be covered because you're not making any effort to earn it. You are getting it automatically. Your what was said at the back of the mind, you are not creating any bhava in that.
I don't know if anywhere in the suttas that there is in-depth description of this sort of profiteering sort of idea. I'm not aware of it. Maybe Professor Dharji remembers. I know that there is a larger list of right livelihood that includes certain other professions which the Buddha suggests not to be engaged in, like I think acting was one of them, if I remember correctly. But I'm not sure. Maybe in that there is a further description of this particular concept, but I don't remember.
That's okay. I think perhaps we are unnecessarily going too deep into that. I don't know. This is, like you said, it could be simply the mention of profiteering in some sense.
You must see that all this is said about bhikkhus, so kindly be aware of that.
Yeah. So that's what I had prefaced.
That's true.
This is about bhikkhus, so we were just extrapolating from that, but this was actually said about monastics.
For bhikkhus, in detail it is mentioned, trying to impress the bhikkhus so as to get more donation, trying to do, then there's the medical, practicing medicine, practicing astrology, and there's so many other things, a large list of things by which the person is trying to, impress the lay person to get more donations for him or get more facilities for himself. So those are kind of details of that. They're all mentioned as a part of bhikkhu livelihood. Regarding the lay livelihood, this is what most of the time it is not doing things which are prohibited, and this is the best we can get into that. The other things are actually derived, that you're doing, for example, that are directly following from, related to the precepts. So we must look at it in that sense. And even the others, basic Shila, if you see Buddha's repeated injunction that right view is the forerunner, then he mentions from right view follows right thought, from right thought follows, Samma Ditti follows Samma Sankappo, and from that follows Samma Vacha, from that follows Samma Kammanto, and so on. So everything goes guided by the right view. So if the view is not right, for example, if the view is mundanely right, then you have mundane advantages. Say you're focusing entirely on Kamma and the gains from Kamma, then there's a limited benefit. If the view is Four Noble Truths, the cause of suffering in others, then they follow automatically. And precepts, you can say in a sense, they follow from Samma Sankappo. If you see Samma Sankappo, Nekhamma Sankappo, Avihinsa Sankappo, Avyapada Sankappo. They're essentially greed, hatred, and delusion, and that they are not there, and therefore they are promoting the freedom from greed, which is not stealing, freedom from violence, which is not killing, and so on. So they have a relationship. And it's not only this direction, it works other direction also. If, for example, we are doing constantly, we have an understanding, wrong view, that of course animals don't have any consciousness, and it was there in scientific circles for thousands of years. And therefore you can kill animals without any compunction, without any feeling that they're really, and in the mechanistic world, it was thought that when the animals are killed and there's a crying, it is like a machine getting creaking when it is not working properly. So when you have such a kind of a delusional view, you can, it will only going to make your view worse and worse. So they work both ways, and therefore, once we see it in that sense, the importance of the whole Eightfold Path and each one of the links being equally important becomes very, very significant. Good, Prashad. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation.
My pleasure.